I believe all of our problems have started as we've become more and more disconnected from nature. There's a lot of talk these days about the biome, that there's a living ecosystem inside of ourselves and somehow in communication with the biome of agriculture. Just observe, there's an absolutely breathtaking magic of symbiosis that occurs in the forest between mycelium, microbes, the forest canopy, the plants growing beneath the canopy. It's diversity at its best. There's no competition. Everything is mutually supportive. So as a physician, farming and working on bodies is one and the same. And it's very easy to understand, and we really need to understand that so that we can work with it more intelligently. And it operates on a principle of resonance. And that resonance conveys informational fields back and forth between humans and our analog partners in nature, plants. And that's why it's so important and so much you can learn just from growing, farming, and observing. Then you'll know exactly how the body works as well. So the Native Americans here called this area the Klamath Knot, because it's a confluence where everything comes together of many rivers and many mountain ranges. And as you can see, just looking out here, you have these different mountain ranges all coming together, which is why we have so much water. It all empties into here. So the Smith River here, actually we should call it the Hayuchi River, after the Native Americans. This is considered one of the cleanest, if not the cleanest, river in the United States today, because the geography is so rugged here that it defies any kind of development. There's just too many mountains, too much water, so nobody can come in here. We call it Big Flat. And originally this was the Native Americans' sacred area where they came to summer. And it's very fertile up here, pure water, so it's a perfect place for them. Of course, during the gold rush days, it gained prominence because these areas are rich in gold ore as well. There was an interesting little period where the elites, so-called, discovered this area, and so they used their resources actually to build roads into this rugged river canyon, which is the only reason why it exists here, because they were looking at this area as a future haven for themselves where they could come summer and have their, little summer palaces. Fortunately for us, they abandoned that but left their roads and their infrastructure. No power lines or anything, but those of us that followed, and there's maybe a dozen settlements out here, some ranchers, we're all off-grid and have to provide for ourselves our own electricity and water, but it's a perfect area for off-gridding as well. Medicine took its major turn into its present system at the beginning of the 1900s, when the Rockefeller Foundation came into prominence with the new burgeoning oil industry. And they had a whole new system based on selling their own wares. And the problem that they encountered is that people did not like this new class of doctors that they created, medical doctors, nor did they do well on the medicines that they were peddling. People didn't feel well on them, and the prominent doctors of the day were naturopaths. And so the way the Rockefeller Foundation, working in concert with other forces overseas, the way they dealt with it is they literally delegislated naturopathic or naturopathy, so that a naturopathic doctor couldn't even get a license to practice, and the only license you could get was as a medical doctor. Then they systematically closed naturopathic colleges that were teaching real medicine. They burnt the largest library, 4 stories in Philadelphia, of natural medicine to the ground, literally burnt it. They incarcerated naturopaths, persecuted them and their families. And so it was a very efficient business model as far as getting rid of the competition. And of course, it was old man Rockefeller himself who famously quoted that competition is a sin.
Remember the mortar and pestle was in every drugstore. I don't think they use that symbol anymore, right? The mortar and pestle, where you're grinding up plants and creating your own medicines. So that was still sort of in the belief system in America at the time. The drug world hadn't overshadowed everything. But Barre and I always had and knew that that felt right, that was the initial connection.
And where we grew up, a lot of the people hadn't even been in this country for that long. My family hadn't been that long, so they brought to this country their old ways, which included herbal medicine. And I think the pharmaceutical industry at that point also tried to maintain that nexus of the mortar and pestle, to give people the connotation that there's something good and natural about that. And originally, all drugs were derived from plants and not just totally synthetic like they are now. We're doing some basic plant alchemy here, and I'm mixing up a batch of compost tea. Now, what's unique about this even more so is that we brew it in a Vortex cylinder. And this Vortex cylinder mimics the creative implosion cycles of nature, what some people would call toroidal fields. It actually duplicates a toroidal field in water. And the person that discovered these principles in water, and he's been called the Tesla of water because he understood and observed the same thing Tesla understood, only he saw it in water. He spent a lifetime in forestry in Austria, so he spent many hours just staring at trout in a stream and wondered how they just stayed stationary in a rapid current. And finally figured out that through their gills they're creating a toroidal field, or what we could even think of as an anti-gravitational effect within water. And then from that, later on in his life, he developed many devices that were literal anti-gravitational devices that still are operational today. And this unit here, it creates that exact vortex that mathematically unfolds mathematically relative to the Fibonacci sequence that many people are discovering these days. That is the code that unlocks all of life and all regeneration in all of nature. Now, we have to understand too, water is literally a magical substance on this planet and responsible for all life on this planet. So when you put water in a toroidal and create a toroidal field, it's unlocking those potentials within water, and then everything that touches it is going to be transformed and highly elevated energetically by it. Now, when we put in our formula, biodynamic formula in here, it does several things. It's adding microorganisms, which is going to build healthy new topsoil and topsoil for future generations. And also because the microorganisms as well as the implosion technology breaks everything down into micronutrients, we just need a fraction of the nutrition to get way more growth, so you don't burn the ground out by just trying to dump in a lot of your typical nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and it's in a nice biodynamically balanced solution. So it's just naturally, I hardly have to do any soil testing or anything after the crops are established, and then I feed them this way. So it's good for the land, it's good for the crops. It's a way where we can get abundant growth without forcing anything or doing things at the expense of the farm or the soil. In my early studies, I was very attracted to what a lot of people loosely call alchemy. And I was just always fascinated with those alchemists, because before it became pure chemistry, they understood the forces of nature and how to harness those more directly in the chemist lab. And in my medical studies, chemistry was always my favorite subject. So they had back then a class of physicians who were alchemists at the same time, and they grew their own plants because they understood that in order to really learn the properties of a plant, and they knew it wasn't just the chemical properties, but to learn the personality of a plant, they had to follow that plant through its entire growth cycle. They also knew that if they were making medicine out of that plant, that if they grew it, then there was a special connection between themselves and that plant.
We found this little spot up here, which to us is one of the last pristine places in the whole state. And we're recreating what is familiar to us, which is the connection to the land and to plant life. We started questioning what was happening because we knew that, being gardeners, that the earth herself has gifted us for every plant that is native to America and North America and the world, wherever you live. There's a healing quality. It has a gift to give the human body. We could see as the world of medicine went into more drugs, we felt like, no, we could see even back then that it needs to get back to balance, back to what nature provides for us.
From day one, I was always considered a bit of a troublemaker by my teachers and my parents. And you know, in hindsight, I think I understand that a little bit, because there's something in me, for whatever reason, that just didn't want to conform. I was bored with the normal schooling and the way things were done. And I just always wanted to search things out myself and make up my own mind. When I was 9 years old, my mother was diagnosed with cancer, very proud, energetic woman, and I watched her over a 4-year period just reduced to a shell of her former self. And of course, she had adopted conventional medicine, chemo, nuclear, and so forth. It just basically destroyed her body, and I can't help but believe that that had an impact on me that largely shaped not just my career choice, but how I chose to practice my profession. Okay, will you give us breakfast tomorrow morning too? Huh? Actually, we've been growing way back, like almost 50 years ago when we were first together.
When we were first together.
Every place we've ever been, we've always grown things. Now and then had a couple controversial plants thrown in, but always had our home gardens and always grew together. Over the years, we just become a team. There's certain things that I defer to Deb. You know, she does have the original green thumb, and talks to the plants. She's our plant whisperer. And I do a lot of the setup, you know, a lot of the kind of heavy lifting sort of things to prep. I do a lot of rock work, rock borders, build fences. So we've just always been a great team, and then whatever needs to be done, we just pitch in and do it together.
Going into medicine together, and us working in that field and recognizing, Bear especially recognizing that real medicine comes from the earth and going back to those roots and recognition. And then when we no longer had a clinic, then I went into the nursery industry and learned the world of horticulture, and now they're married together.
In our clinic days, Deb always managed our clinics and kind of prepped people just by doing waiting room psychiatry. So people typically felt a lot better before they even got to me. In fact, the kids we'd see always referred to her as Debbie Doctor.
Never forget that nature has an intelligence. And just like the human body has an inherent relationship with the plant life of the world, the plants themselves have their own life. One of the oldest ones is called the Three Sisters, and the Native Americans knew that. And that was corn came first, beans below that used the corn as support, and in front of that was the squash, because the squash leaves are so huge that they would keep the soil damp. And so the Three Sisters, that's just anybody that's a gardener knows about the Three Sisters, but that's what Mother Nature does. She has created her own relationships as well, just like we have with the plant life. And it's remarkable, and it is, frankly, as far as I'm concerned, it's a miracle every day, if you have the eyes to see.
The majority of all issues that people face in life are non-crisis issues, but we still apply that crisis intervention model to the totality of our medical system today. Because of my natural inclinations, I always wanted to understand a deeper level of not just physiology, but the human psyche and how everything ties together. So that led me to all my other studies, and I always wanted to know what was right around the next bend. It's naturopathy, chiropractic, herbology, homeopathy, and eventually that all merged together as far as my specialty over the years in bioterrain medicine. Early on in practice, many disorders were extremely rare. One case in point, neurological disorders, MS, ALS, that sort of thing. And now they're epidemic. So what could be the cause? Does it mean that our bodies are failing or natural design is breaking down? No, that would be nonsense. The obvious thing is to understand what's right in front of our face, which is our environment is now laden with neurotoxins, toxic metals, heavy metals as we call them, a whole slew of pesticides and pharmaceuticals that are actually proven neurotoxins. And as those have made their way into our bodies by way of the food, by way of the environment, all of a sudden we have these neurodegenerative disorders. So the real dilemma that we face now is that people do not want to take responsibility for their own health and for their own life. And we've all had conveniences through institutionalized medicine, factory farming, and so forth, and we developed habits and taste around that. People that do not want to take responsibility because it's much easier just to take a pill or just reach for some convenience food, or maybe not muster up the energy to get outside and do some exercise. So people actually get very defensive, and they will really fight for their limitations, fight for their lack of health, and also fight for a system that is getting them sicker. Another key thing we do that you might notice is we have very specific shapes with rocks and all the borders around our planting areas. And you notice these are spirals that mimic the Fibonacci spiral, but also the number of rocks is very specific in each one because that actually creates a resonance. And in biogeometry, it's we've proven out in studies that it actually greatly accelerates plant growth and plant health. So we pay a lot of attention not to just planting things, but how we border things and how we set things in the ground. And each plant is also oriented in a certain way, and we use measurement devices to make sure each plant is planted with the proper orientation according to the maximum resonance that's healthy for that particular plant. There was a time when physicians actually grew their medicines, and they did that because they understand that the principles were the same as far as growing plants and treating the bodies. What we were really lacking now in what we think of as science is a unified understanding that there's basic universal laws, and that these laws canvas the entire spectrum of all life. There's not laws over here for plants, laws over here for humans. What we need to understand is that the elements, the molecules, that we have gone exclusively into it as far as our present understanding of chemistry, are just collapsed waveforms. This takes on special significance when we understand the waveforms come from pure thought. Now, there are sentient beings, humanity included, that are capable of producing thought. Now, those thoughts have electrical consequences, and we are all co-creators on this realm. So it became very apparent to me early on when I was seeing many people with so-called incurable diseases that there was that element, not just a relationship between the psyche and their biology, but they were in fact one and the same. So when I'm testing soil or when I'm testing a body, I do laboratory processes that allow me to extrapolate from chemical molecules that I get in my lab samples into an understanding what that means on the electrical level. So for instance, in the farm here, when I look at the soil, those electrical vectors are the key thing. And rather than just trying to throw on more fertilizer, organic or otherwise, what you're really going to do is end up getting very short-term results. You're going to get inferior plant growth, and eventually you're going to burn the soil out instead of build it. What we want to do is create a compatibility between the rootlets and the soil. In other words, a compatibility in the micronage. And the key, though, is microorganisms, because microorganisms are the conduit. They are the communication field. And the same microorganisms that live in the soil live in us, and they operate through a communication system of resonance. And this is very easy to understand, and it's something that we absolutely have to start wrapping our minds around in conventional science if we're going to find any solutions to our problems. Resonance is how information goes from point A to point B, and resonance, think of it as just a wave going through a medium such as a ripple through water. And just like a water medium, that is a transmission medium for these waveforms to travel between microorganisms inside of us and make them compatible with the ecosystem. So you can't possibly have health in the soil or health in our bodies unless you have health in both.